2018. He serves on 4 committees that are critical to our national security, including armed services. He's actually a colonel in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve. He's the only member of the Senate still serving in the United States military. And I thought interesting for Senator Sullivan, we've had a big focus, Senator, on China over the last 2 days, that you were deployed in 1996 with the 31st Marine Expeditionary Force in the third Taiwan Straits crisis, which is pretty significant. And I just also want to say I had a chance to serve with Senator Sullivan when he was Assistant Secretary of State for Economic Affairs. We both worked for Secretary Condoleezza Rice, and he's a member of the Aspen Strategy Group, so we couldn't be more happy to have Senator Sullivan here as a national security expert and as a great senator from Alaska. And Dan, you're going to be interviewed by one of America's great correspondents in Peter Baker, so welcome.
Great. Hey, thanks, Nick, and great to be on the program, especially after being there with Senator Murkowski, and always a pleasure to be with my friend Ambassador Burns and Peter. Looking forward to the questions. And I have your book too. I haven't read it yet, but congrats on your book. It's
a great book, Dan.
Well, I'm telling you, I'm the biggest James Baker fan, so I'm looking forward to reading it.
Well, thank you very much. And Nick, the check is in the mail. Thank you very much, Senator. It's very kind of you, and I appreciate your picking up the book. If you get a chance, it's great. You're terrific to join us tonight. And we just finished a conversation with Senator Murkowski about the Arctic, but one thing she mentioned at the end leads us into today's conversation with you, which is China. She mentioned China is, competing with us, not just in all the places we normally think about, but even in the Arctic. And that raises the question for me about what your perspective is these days about China. One of the things it feels like we may have some bipartisan agreement on in Washington, among all the other differences we have, is China. And do you see it that way? What did President Trump get right? What did President Trump get wrong? What should we, looking at his policy toward China, what should we adopt and agree to, and what should we do in a different way now that we have a different president?
Well, look, I'm really glad you asked that question, because I think it's the key question, and I think it's often overlooked question. And, as Nick mentioned, I started working on the China issues really as part of my first deployment as a Marine. As he mentioned, I was part of what's now referred to as the third Taiwan Strait crisis, when President Clinton sent 2 carrier battle groups when it looked like China was getting ready to invade Taiwan, and the ship I was on actually was the one that got the orders to run the Taiwan Strait at the height of the crisis. And during my time at the State Department, I was the lead on the Secretary Paulson's strategic economic dialogues as a Alaska cabinet official in charge of energy and natural resources. Went to China a number of times. And I mention all this because when I first got to the Senate, a little over 6 years ago, I used to give a speech that was essentially saying, hey, look, I know we got challenges with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and I get it. I'm a Marine. I've been out there to the Middle East. But the big challenge is China for the 21st century. And nobody, as far as I can tell, as a new senator, is talking about it. So I would go give that speech on the Senate floor on a regular basis. Here's the good news, and I actually think it's really good news. I think it's really important news. And again, I'm so glad you asked the question, because I don't think it gets recognized as much. And that is, to your point, there is a bipartisan consensus. And I cannot give that speech ever again on the Senate floor. Everybody's talking about China. And in many ways, there is growing bipartisan consensus about what we should do. Let me give you a couple examples. I do think President Trump and his team deserve a lot of credit with regard to the national security strategy that, H.R. McMaster and Matt Pottinger and others worked on, saying, hey, we need to reorient from the post 9/11 focus on violent extremist organizations, which was the proper focus, to the return of great power competition with China as our pacing threat. Then Secretary Mattis put forward the National Defense Strategy, which was very focused on that. And as you mentioned, or as Nick mentioned, I sit on the Armed Services, and I can tell you, Peter, that the last 3 to 4 NDAAs have literally been shaped in a bipartisan way, focused on China, focus on the national defense strategy. So to me, there is a very significant bipartisan coming together on this issue. And I think it's really important because, you know, we got a long way to go, but I honestly believe the thing that Xi Jinping fears more than anything is a long-term, bipartisan, serious strategy with regard to the United States dealing with the challenges that we have with China. We're not there yet, but it's starting to happen. And even now, you know, I have a lot of disagreements with the Biden administration on a number of issues, but I am working very closely with a number of the Biden administration officials, Kurt Campbell, the Secretary of Defense, some of the NSC folks, the new Assistant Secretary Eli Ratner for Defense, very regularly with them on this big problem set.
You mentioned Taiwan specifically in your own involvement back in the day, in the 1990s. Today, with so many other issues that we are dealing with in China, how important is Taiwan still? I mean, we're talking about the South China Sea, we talk about tariffs and trade, we talk about Belt and Road, we talk about so many issues with China. Does Taiwan still, you know, represent the same, you know, sine qua non that it once did as kind of a defining issue with us when it comes to China?
Yes, I think it's enormously important. And, you know, I was on a Zoom with a number of China scholars recently, just trying to get smart on the issue. And I don't want to misquote him, but a professor out at Stanford, Larry Diamond, had mentioned that in some ways this issue is more important than ever, because if you did have some kind of forceful attempt to take over Taiwan, and I was just recently out there with a Senate CODEL, Senator Duckworth and I, and Senator Coons, the three of us were in Taiwan just about a month ago, primarily bringing vaccinations to the country, announcing those, because the Chinese Communist Party has really been kind of strangling Taiwan from receiving vaccinations. But, you know, in this Zoom I had recently, Professor Diamond talked about how, you know, yes, that would be a huge issue between the United States and China in our allies in the Asia Pacific. But he said in many ways, the entire world order could be at stake. And, you know, some people have likened this to, you know, that could be an event almost, you know, analogous to something like Sarajevo in 1914, such an enormously important event. So it's an issue that a number of senators, both Democrats and Republicans, are very focused on. And as you know, Peter, the Senate has played a very prominent role in this regard, particularly as it relates to the Taiwan Relations Act, which I did double check President Biden supported when he was a US Senator. And that does set the kind of tenor for our relationship with Taiwan. And I think one of the things we need to do is, again, to your question, highlight to the American people just how important this issue is. And I'll just mention one final thing. My first time I was in Taiwan, not on a ship, but on the ground, was a CODEL led by Senator McCain. And the State Department official who greeted us, we were traveling on a bus to meet with the president. He said something I'll never forget. He said, you know, you're in Taiwan, it's a vibrant democracy, it's a vibrant economy. And the only reason this place exists is because of the sacrifice of the American people, the sacrifice of the American military. It's something that every American, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, should take pride in, because of this vibrant place, democracy, one of the most important economies in the world. And that exists because of what the United States did. That's what he said, stuck with me. And I think it's important to remind people of that.
We're trying to cram so much in a very short amount of time here, but I think it would be remiss not to mention the Uyghurs, which remains, of course, one of the great human rights, you know, catastrophes in the world right now. Is there more we should be doing about that? Because it often feels like that issue gets lost among all the many other issues we have with China, including, you know, very big trade issues and tariff issues. Is that something that you see options that we haven't taken that we should be taking?
Yeah, I actually firmly believe that there's more that we should be doing. One of the issues, I know you had the SEC chairman Gensler on yesterday, and I wrote him and had a good discussion with him just over the weekend. I wrote him with a number of other senators, raising some of the real significant challenges that investors, American investors, face when investing in Chinese companies that are listed on American exchanges. You may have seen the chairman of the SEC put out guidance on Friday in response to our letter, and he's going to be looking at this issue, and I think that's a good start. But to the one more specific point that you raised, we do have a lot of American companies, a lot of American financial institutions, a lot of American banks who seem to kind of be looking the other way with regard to the work they're doing with some of these companies that have connections to this human rights catastrophe. And I think we need to make sure that we're starting at home to American Wall Street firms and other companies saying, hey, if you are working with, funding, complicit with some of these companies that are involved in that part of the world undertaking these human rights abuses and more than that, you need to cease that. And if you don't, I think, again, there's going to be a lot more bipartisan support in the Congress to take action in that way, particularly as it relates to some of our own companies, not just the Chinese companies.
You mentioned, we'll wrap it up here. You mentioned the letter that you and Senator Kennedy wrote to Chairman Gensler, and he put out these guidelines. Are you satisfied with those guidelines? Do they go far enough in your view, or do you think that there should be more?
I think it's a good start. As I said to him, what they really need to do is fully enforce what we referenced in the letter, the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act. Now, again, that goes to your first question. That bill passed in December unanimously in the US Senate and unanimously in the House. I mean, that doesn't happen a lot around here.
That's right.
And what that bill in essence says is if you are a Chinese company listed on an American exchange, that you have to undertake the same audit processes that American companies undertake to also be listed, leveling the playing field. And from my perspective, what I encourage the chairman to do is expeditiously and fully enforce that. If they don't undertake those kind of audits, then the legislation mandates that they be delisted. I think it's unlikely that they're going to do that. And as you know, Peter, it's not up to the CEOs of those companies. It's going to be up to the Chinese Communist Party that's going to call the shot on whether they're going to allow American auditors to do that. But I think in some ways that's just the tip of the iceberg. Let me give you two more examples. The SEC has oversight of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and has oversight of what's called the Conflict Minerals Act. And again, every American company has to abide by those laws to access our investors, American capital. Why should we not require Chinese companies to do that? So I'm working on legislation that relates to both those. I think it's going to be very bipartisan because it's reasonable and it's fair. And I think the chairman views those as something that's interesting, and we're going to continue to have a conversation on that.
Well, that's great. I wish we could have a longer conversation because it's such an important issue, but you're great to join us today. We're delighted to have you with us and really appreciate your comments and your thoughts for us. We'll turn it back over now to Nick, and I think we'll thank the Senator for joining us.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Senator, we could have gone on for a long time. We want to be respectful of your time, but I just want to thank you for making the point about bipartisanship. As you know very well, the Chinese leadership has been saying that the United States is weakening and that China is strengthening, and we need to show them that's not the case. And you're right that if Democrats and Republicans can be united on strategy and on the messaging to China, that's going to help in that. So thank you for what you've been doing as a member of the Senate to make that happen.
Thank you, Nick. And we've done it before, right? After World War II, when the Cold War was upon us and the strategy of containment was launched, I mean, it wasn't easy, but that was overall decades of bipartisan focus that helped us win the Cold War. I think we can do it again.
You're exactly right. And thank you for everything you're doing as a member of the Aspen Strategy Group. We appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. I look forward when we meet in person again.
Hopefully late September. So we'll be in touch. But thanks, Senator. And to our friend Peter Baker, you always answer the call. Thank you very much for being with us, Peter.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Looking forward to being in person too.
Thank you.